Hello and welcome to Really Cool People, a podcast produced by Schweitzer Church. I'm your host, Jason Leininger. This is a place to hear stories of really cool people. The hope is that as we hear these stories, you and I will be inspired, encouraged, and challenged through moments of serendipity. In a sermon entitled The Weight of Glory, C.S. Lewis said, "There are no ordinary people. You and I have never talked to a mere mortal." It's my joy over the next few moments to introduce you to somebody who may seem somewhat ordinary, especially themselves, and yet they're a really cool person. Today, we're going to meet Marilyn Quigley. Marilyn is a daughter. She's a wife, been a mom. She's been a teacher. She's been a professor. She's a writer and an author. She's composed a number of things. She's been a leader much of her life. She's also been a learner. She's got a fantastic story to tell us about her own life, some of the things that she's learned along the way, how she's taken a number of risks, and she's going to highlight 5 of those big risks for us. So sit back and enjoy this conversation with Marilyn Quigley. Marilyn, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, glad you're here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Let's begin with your story. Who is Marilyn?
Well, Marilyn does not consider herself a really cool person. I will tell you that, but thank you. Well, my story, every story is unique, of course, and I was born 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor. So I came into a world that was in chaos, as maybe our world is today. I've wondered sometimes what my parents thought bringing their first child, into a world like that. But they were brave and did it anyway. They didn't know what was coming, I guess.
They didn't have much choice at that point,
They
did
really
they?
didn't. No, you are absolutely right. They were a Christian couple. So I came, fortunately, into a good foundation. About 3 years later, my brother was born. Both of us were very loved and wanted children. I think my mother was 21 when I was born, and she got married secretly when she was 16. So, and it's funny, but we won't go into that. My father was a machinist. He had taken a 4-year apprenticeship at the Frisco Railroad where his father and 3 brothers worked. And my mother was a homemaker, actually, until I was 12 years old when I went to junior high, and she decided that I needed some clothes besides the feed sack dresses she had been sewing for me. Until I was 11, we lived in my grandparents' home upstairs. We had the whole upstairs of a brand new house that they had built. And my mother really, it was a sacrifice for her, I realized then and now even more, not to have her own home. My father just somehow felt he couldn't afford it, although I think he could have, but took him that long, and then we did build a house. I would say that I had a very good home. We went to church regularly, and I know that my dad was trying to be a better person, and they gave me really solid moral training. I don't remember it being a home where, as a lot of people are today, well, let's pray about that. There's a lot of prayer in homes, and I kind of wish, actually, when we brought our boys up, it had been a little more like that. So if I could go back and change some things, that might be one thing. But I was growing in my faith, and they were probably growing in theirs. But so my spiritual growth in my home life was gradual, through going to church, hearing sermons, being at youth group. I went to Central Assembly, was my home church. So I was taught strong obedience to parents. My dad's philosophy was, if you don't learn to obey us, you won't learn to obey God. And I accepted that. And I had spankings, They were not harsh. They were done in love. And the night I caught the house on fire, playing with my 10 birthday candles, after my dad had told me to put those candles away, the curtain got on fire and we put it out. My dad came to me and he said, Marilyn, you disobeyed me and you are going to have a spanking. I was 10, probably that 4th grade year, maybe. I don't know. Mm-hmm. And he said, but I'm not going to spank you tonight because I am really too angry. So I had to spend the night knowing I would get a spanking the next morning. It was not hard because by that time I think he wished he didn't have to do it. But when he gave his word, he would do it. So anyway, it was some sort of a spanking. My schooling, I started at a 2-room school called Ritter. And it was the 4th grade, because you ask in some of the preparatory work what happened in the 4th grade. So anybody who's interested in my 4th grade can read my book that just came out. It's called My War at Windsor School, and it is set really in my 4th grade year at that school, which was unique, to say the least. And I won't go into that. Just buy the book.
We'll come back to that. Maybe there's more you can go into about that.
I took piano lessons, and then in 5th grade, I started violin in school. Wasn't taking lessons, but I had a kind of a natural aptitude to music. So I still play the violin, actually, in the Joy Pickers, and that's really fun for me. I went on through the Springfield Public Schools. I went through Reed, which has now been torn down. I went 2 years to Central, and then Hillcrest was built, and I was in the first graduating class. Throughout my growing up, there was an expectation in my home, especially from my father, when you go to college. It was never if. I never heard the word if. So sitting on the porch, he would talk about when you go to college. So in my mind, there was really no doubt about it, no choice. And I was the first person in my family to get a college degree. And I think my dad wanted to, but there was no money. So I went through SMS then in 3 years, not because I was brilliant at all, but because I did not want to work during the summers. I'd never had a job because we lived out where it wasn't easy to walk to or get transportation, you know. So I thought, what can I do? I don't want to work this summer after my freshman year. And I got this really good idea. Just keep going to school, Marilyn, because that's good. Nobody can say that you're freeloading off your parents. So I really worked hard to get through in 3 years, which allowed me to have that extra year of teaching. And they told me, because I was only 20 when I started and had the interview and looked about 18, they said, we think you will do really well in junior high. And I thought, that's good. That's where I belong. Put me with those younger kids. When the letter came, it said Central High School. Wow. And I thought, well, okay, I'll try. So I did start teaching at Central. By that time, I was married because I had married at 19. And I'll talk about that because you've asked for what are some big risks. My first big risk was my marriage. I took an engagement ring when I had known my future husband 2 months and 6 days. He's laughing. And my children have said to me, Mom, what in the world was wrong with Peppo and Grammy that they didn't say anything to you? But they didn't. And to tell you the truth, I think it was because I had dated a guy they didn't like. And when they saw Ed, they went, she better grab this one. I really think that was a lot of it. They did like him a lot, you know, but that's pretty fast.
What was going through your mind in those 2 months and 6 days?
I love this guy. He's perfect. He didn't turn out to be perfect, but, you know, close.
What made you think he was perfect?
He was a very kind person.
Yeah.
I felt that he was a good-looking person, which everyone wants a little bit of that,
Yeah.
But more than that, we came from the same church backgrounds, and our families were similar, and my parents had absolutely stressed marry a Christian. And so I really felt he was a genuine Christian. He had a college degree, which to me was important only because, not saying that that's the most important thing, but I felt like we should be on somewhat of an equal educational, basis just to make the marriage better.
Yeah.
So, those things. And then there was just a mutual attraction. And I don't know. I just felt very strongly. If somebody were to say, well, did you really pray about that, Marilyn? Because, the older I am, the more I realize it's good to pray about things. Honestly, I don't remember it. I just felt that God had sent me this person. So I've grown a lot in what I pray about. But here's the thing. I really feel that even when we aren't doing things exactly right, like all the prayers we need, God is looking down and guiding anyway. I don't think everything depends on what we're doing correctly, because God knows, our future. So that was, you've asked also about big risks. So I said that is a huge risk, because when you think about it too, I saw him after he went in, we were engaged. And then a few weeks later, he went into the Army Reserves. He was going to be drafted until he met me. He decided he would join the reserves and maybe, he wouldn't go to Vietnam. And so when he did that, they said, well, we'll take you if your draft notice hasn't gone out. Would you like us to call? And he said yes. And they called Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where he's from. It was in the mail to go out the next morning.
Wow.
Anyway, so that happened, and we really felt like that was God, in allowing that. So then he went into the reserves, and I saw him at Thanksgiving after basic training. I saw him Christmas. We wrote letters, which I have in my attic, marked "Do not read."
Who's that marked to? Do not read to whom?
Well, it wouldn't be Ed. He has no desire to go back and read them, but I've read a lot of them. No, I'm just kidding. Anybody
Do you want your kids to read those?
It'd be fine. As long as they're up there, and I'm thinking, do I need to really I don't think so. I think they're readable. But, I'm thinking about the fact that we married in May and he came home 2 weeks before. So did I know this person? Not really. But it's been a really good marriage. And so not perfect, because I really don't know of one. Except yours, maybe, Jason. I don't know.
I think every marriage is, it's got its hills and valleys.
I do too.
And
you can't look for a perfection, really, in life,
No.
right? That's when we get to heaven. So that was a big risk. So kind of moving along here. I started teaching at Central when I was 20. I had some students who were probably the oldest. They were freshmen and sophomores. So I was in a school where I had been sitting as a student 4 years before. I was 20 years old. I was not old enough to vote yet in those days. One of my students said to me once, it was on election day, big election day, and Mrs. Quigley, have you voted yet? And I said, not yet.
What year was that? 19...
what was it? 61, 62.
62.
Would that have been an election year? Anyway, it was one of those. I would say 62.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So anyway, my first year of teaching was difficult. And not so much maybe because I was young, but my expectations, I did not like chaos in a class. I was there to teach, but on the other hand, I went in wanting my students to like me. That's a mistake. Any teachers listening out there would know that. So the second year was different. But, part of it was that I was teaching things I was really not prepared for. And most of us who have college degrees realize when you get out, there's so much you still don't know, that you're not totally prepared. I wasn't. So I had to come home every night and study for how to present the concepts that were a part of me, but I had never taught them before. So that was a problem. And then I didn't want people to whisper, even though I had been a whispering student. I expected my students to be a little bit better. So when I came, at the end of that year, I remember saying to my husband, what else can I do with this degree? And he gave me some of the best advice I ever had. He said, well, I really think that if you give up after 1 year, you will spend your life feeling a failure. And I thought about that, and I said, I'm not going to spend my life feeling a failure. So I went back with a different attitude, which was don't smile for 6 weeks, and several other things that worked. And once I did become the fun person that I am, it was way better. And I am so glad I took that advice, because I think I'm just more of a, we're all given skills and abilities.
Yeah.
And I think teaching is one of mine.
What subject did you teach?
Oh, I could have said that. Yes, English. Yes, a subject every student loves.
Of course.
So I had these students, but I have people in this church who were my students.
Yeah.
And one of them is in my Sunday school class. And she looked at me and said, is your last name Quigley? We were at a party, and I said, yes. And then she told me she had me as a sophomore. She said some nice things, but I won't repeat them. My second big risk, because I've kind of realized that this kind of goes through the big risks of life, was a decision after 5 years of teaching to stop teaching and get my master's degree. I did that because I felt pushed into a corner. I had made my plans, and God was not cooperating.
Oh, God. Why didn't you see it my way?
Yeah.
Oh, my.
But I felt that a nice time to have children would be 5 years after I was married. Well, that did not happen. And I decided, well, I do not want to teach another year. So what can I do that is a logical thing that a person with a degree does? I did not think it would be stopping to go work at the brand new McDonald's, that had just probably come to Springfield.
Yeah.
So I thought, what can I do? Sort of like, what can I do because I don't want to work? I'll go on to school. Well, this was, what can I do because I don't want to teach? And I decided, well, it would be very logical. People would think, okay, you're getting your master's degree. That's good. But that was giving up about, wait for this, the whopping $5,000 a year of my salary, which back then, though, was pretty good.
It meant something.
It did. So I had to give that up and pay for a master's degree. But Ed said, well, that was okay because he's that kind of a husband. He wants me to do what I feel I need to do, and God wants me to do. So I started, and I got halfway through, and I became pregnant, and then I had another baby, and I had a very little time to finish that degree before they said, it's done, it's over. You had about 6 years was all to finish it. But that is the second best decision I ever made in my life because it led to places and opened doors I never dreamed of, which I can talk about. So I stayed home with those children having a master's degree for 10 years. The reason I did that is that I felt a very strong principle that God had given me my children, and I needed to have those early years with them. I do not regret that at all, and I just added up this morning about how much money I lost. 10 years at $5,000 a year. living on one salary. My husband is an artist, and he worked for a very average, really, salary, but we made it work. And I did some side jobs of teaching and things like that to help. And so I do not regret that. So I have 2 sons who both are living Christian lives. One is here in Springfield. His name is Colin. He works in the city manager's suite in Springfield. And the other one is Brian, who lives in Alexandria, Virginia, has his own consulting business, and has given us 3 grandchildren. During that time, I had a children's choir at Evangel Temple, where we attended. I wrote a children's musical, and it was published. So I wasn't just taking care of family and children. I was busy, and I was writing short stories that were published, and it was a good time in my life. My third big risk was accepting an opportunity to teach one class at Evangel University. And I was in a state at that time, a deep state of depression and anxiety that had come because of worry about what I thought I had cancer. It turned out, I can tell you now that I didn't, but it went on too long not knowing. And by the time I found out, the problem was it had done something to me, the worry. So I learned, I was about 35, and I learned what worry and fear and anxiety can do. So that first class that I taught was so difficult because of my own state, emotional state, and you lack confidence when you're in a situation like that. I had never taught composition as a course before. I had never taught college level before. So I took a risk that I look back at it now and I think, how'd you do that? It's kind of funny. Steve Grant, we all know who he is, the announcer.
I don't know him.
You don't know him? Okay, he's worked at KY3 now for 50 years, Steve Grant. Anyway, he was in that class, and I laugh because every time I saw him after that, for 50 years I've said, Steve, I wish you had taken that class over. I got better later. But it was a difficult time, and that is where I began to grow spiritually because I had to lean on God. I had no choice. I couldn't quit. You can't take a job like that and say, I think I'm in over my head. I had no mentors at Evangel at that point to help me. They all assumed I knew what I was doing, and I didn't want to tell them I didn't. So it was a very hard time, but I hung in there and worked my way through it. I think my fourth big risk in life, and maybe a kind of a turning point, was writing a book called Hell Frozen Over about my uncle who was in the Battle of the Bulge. And I went to Belgium to research that book, and I had never written a book. So when everybody knows you're going over to research a book, you really can't change your mind later and say, I think this is beyond me. But at times I really felt that way. So that was a period of growth. I retired 13 years ago at the age of 69. And retirement was easy for me because I was never without some kind of a project or an incentive, and I was able to travel. The fifth big risk was coming to Schweitzer, which happened about 3 years ago after being in a church for 55 years. So I left a place where I knew almost everybody. Everybody knew me. And I had helped to shape a lot, I wouldn't say a lot, but a few things, in that church, and had been on the board at one time and so forth, and came to a place where I knew 2 people. My brother-in-law, Roger,
Mm-hmm.
and his wife Ruth, and they invited us to come. And we did, and we just felt pulled to come here. And there's a story behind that, which I won't go into now, how we both knew without a shadow of a doubt this was the place, and we have never been sorry. And that's my story, Jason.
Marilyn, that's a good story. And there's a ton within your story that we can go back to. So you mentioned that you've got a couple different books that you've written.
Right.
So you're an author.
3, actually.
3. And then you wrote some short stories.
I did way back, published them in take-home magazines for the Sunday school literature.
So there's a unique slant that writers bring to life because they see and hear and try to put the right words and fit all that together in such a way that's then accessible and readable and pleasurable and all those kinds of things. Which one of those has brought you like a great deal of joy, or maybe all of them did?
I think the one that brought me the greatest joy, probably, no doubt, was Hell Frozen Over, the Battle of the Bulge, because it was a way that I told my uncle's story that had been hidden for, 60 years. Because everybody said, don't ask Uncle Coleman what happened in the Army, in the war. We don't want him to cry. So when he started talking about that at family gatherings, and I got the courage to say, would you tell me your story? And he did. And we had lots of interviews. And then when I went, I thought, I can't write about this without going to Belgium and looking. I found the places where he was, a lot of them. But what that did for my family, his children, they were so grateful. They had no idea. They never would have known if I hadn't done that. And my uncle became a different person, from one who wouldn't talk about it to a man, and we went everywhere. We went to Rotary clubs. We went to classes in college. We went to military classes. I can't even name the places, and he would sit on a stool, and I would interview him and take him to these different points where I wanted him to talk about. It changed him. And so, yes, that was a turning point, and that was the last one that was just published actually a couple months ago about my school.
Right.
Was the most fun one. It had sat in my attic and on my computer for 40 years. It had gone through various iterations of getting better and better as I learned how to write better. But it's just been really fun to finally decide I'm going to give it life.
So as you mentioned that it's like the story of your 4th grade year. So is it told through the voice of a 4th grader?
It's told through the voice of a 6th grader who, it's really set in my 4th grade year, but the characters are slightly older.
Okay.
So yes, Sally tells her story. And I have a website that Sydney has helped me set up, and it is so cute, where I'm wanting girls of that age, between I would say 9 and 12, to read it, because the main character's 12.
Okay.
And she doesn't do everything right in her life, and some things are kind of sad and some are scary, but it has a good ending. And I think girls can learn from it. From how do you handle bullies? How do you handle the things that happen when you have lied and you don't want to tell your parents or whatever, and you've done some things that have really caused other people problems and you didn't intend to. So that was really fun. I just thought, I don't care if I make money on the book. That is not a goal. The goal is to get it read. So I gave it away to 44 people at a launch party, and it will be passed around. Sydney devised a little checkout card,
Yeah.
like that used to be in the book.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It will go from person to person over this next year. And I hope about 10 people will read each book.
Wow. That's a fascinating
Marketing plan.
Yeah, marketing plan. It is. Fascinating marketing plan.
Yeah.
So thinking about that fourth grade year, you mentioned that you had to face bullies, and I mean,
my character did.
Your character.
But
so
I faced
you
some
faced
things too.
Yeah.
We had a situation. It was at Ritter School, and this was a 2-room school, and it was not in the Springfield Public Schools at the time. But somebody in our district wanted it to be. And so this mother got a group together, and I don't know how she did it. I don't know the inside workings, but we were going to vote on, did we want to go in with Springfield or did we want to join Willard?
Mm-hmm.
And so the first time we voted, Willard won. Springfield was in progressive education at that time. And your report cards were either progressing or not progressing. Some parents didn't think that was a very good idea, including mine.
Oh.
So there was this big school fight. And the teachers got involved. And the Greene County superintendent and Harry P. Studi, the Springfield superintendent, were hanged in effigy on the sycamore tree by the school, and the picture was put in the paper. So it was an interesting year. So I just incorporated all of that into this.
I'm thinking about how people talk about how our own time is like got all kind of contentiousness, and then you have two principals hanged in effigy.
Yes. Yeah, superintendent.
The superintendents.
Yeah. And, our teachers knew that if Springfield won, they would be out of jobs. And so they got on the Willard side, and they let us know it, which was interesting. So I've worked this into the plot of Sally. Anyway.
You did send me a video that
I did.
Maybe I guess Steve.
That was
that's
Steve Grant.
Yeah, Steve Grant.
It was an interview.
So he interviewed you, and you were talking about Reed School, that you had indoor plumbing at your house, but
Ritter School.
Or Ritter didn't.
We had 2 outside restrooms. Oh yeah, we couldn't figure out why, because most of us had flush toilets. But I did talk to a friend just the other day, and she said, "Well, we didn't." So it was kind of on that cusp.
Yeah.
But I don't know why. It was a brand new school, very beautiful school, brick. The first one had burned down.
And it didn't have indoor plumbing.
It had indoor plumbing, not indoor restrooms,
Okay.
because the rumor was that the president of the school board didn't want to stink up the place. So obviously, I don't know, Jason, I don't know. I just wrote what I had there.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So your boys sounds like on one level, they hear your story about your engagement, and they scratch your head and wonder, kind of disbelief that your parents didn't say anything.
Right.
But then, did you ever come back to them? Like, well, it's a good thing it happened because you wouldn't be here otherwise? Or?
They love their dad and dearly, and they know he was, when a great dad and still is. So they do get that, but they're putting themselves, they're putting themselves, what would I have said if they had done something like that?
Yeah.
And then now one of them has, a son who's 20, and now he's probably looking back on that thinking, okay, here I am. Not that, he's in college right now, but so it was interesting. They realized that was rather unusual, but people did get married a little younger back then than they do now.
How old is your son who's married? How old was he when he got married?
Well, the one in Virginia was 31, and the one in Springfield, Colin, was about 25. So they were older, which we were happy for. But yeah, I think too, I'm a little surprised at that, really.
Yeah.
That they didn't say more, but they loved Ed and always did. He was like a son.
Mm-hmm. The class, when you taught at Evangel, how did that come about? How were you invited to step into that?
A friend of mine taught there and knew that I had a master's degree. And if I had not had a master's degree, there would have been no teaching at Evangel. So that's why God knew, looking ahead, of course, that the master's degree would open doors to me, that he really, I think, had a plan and wanted to use me. So I went in to teach one class. And then, of course, they needed me for another class, which did get better. And it got better and better. And pretty soon, they needed a department head. And I was a part-time teacher. And the dean called me in and said, I would like for you to take this on an interim basis. And I said, I'm not qualified. I don't have a PhD and I'm not full-time. And he said, I think you're qualified. And he said, so, it's for 1 year. I said, well, I can't do this on a part-time basis. He said, no, I'm offering you full-time. And I knew that would mean a free education for my 2 sons. Absolutely free. So you see how God looks ahead. I know you know this, but it's just been a lesson to me, because had I had my will in when our first child was born, there never would have been a master's degree. There never would have been a career. There never would have been free education and just all the things that Evangel gave me for 34 years. And I became the director of composition. That was pretty much my title. After that 1 year interim, I did not want to be in a department head. No, I didn't. So I was very happy just, to do and teach literature and creative writing.
So creative writing is a little different than like technical writing, or it's different than
very
lots of other aspects of writing. So what do you love about the creative writing piece? What really draws you to that?
I have always loved stories, true or not. And, fiction, some people like it, some people don't. I told my mother when I was 13, I remember this, I said, Mom, I'm going to write a book someday. And the first book that I really wrote was Hell Frozen Over. And unfortunately, my mother died while I was over in Belgium doing that research for that book. She had Alzheimer's. And so when I left that morning, I knew I wouldn't see her again. So I did write that book. And then it's just kind of fun for fiction writers to think, what if, what could be? But the fun part of the book I was talking about, My War at Windsor School, was I could take then the fiction, I could make up characters, make up a story that could have been, put it in a setting that really was, and about 90% of the things that happened in the schoolyard, in the classroom, including the spanking I got. Yes, I'm telling all here. Then it really happened. But the plot, the problem I have with the people who went to Ritter, they can't read the book without trying to figure out, well, which one's me? And I even said in the beginning, if you went to Ritter with me, you will not find yourself in here, but they don't believe it.
Let's go back for just a minute. A couple things you said about your childhood. You said that was 10th or 11th birthday, you cut the house.
I cut the house on fire.
The house on fire?
It was a curtain.
Did it burn down? Or
No. The curtain got on fire because my dad had yelled in, Marilyn, are you playing with those candles? Yeah. And I had said, yes, Daddy, put them away right away. I was holding one with a curtain over my head to look and see if the one I had thrown out was in the wastebasket and get it catching fire. And across the valley, out the window, I saw a fire, which was really the curtain behind me.
Oh,
reflection.
Wow.
And so it was fortunate my hair did not catch on fire. No, that's what happened. Was that the question?
Yeah.
That's what happened.
So the whole house didn't burn down?
No, my mother jerked it down and stomped on it, but it did burn enough that the casing, the door frame, was brown.
Was that the house that your dad had built?
No, that was my grandparents' house. We were still with them at that point.
So it was an interesting observation about like living in the upstairs with your grandparents. What was that? What was that like? That experience of having your grandparents so much a part of your life, enmeshed in your life?
It was good in many ways for the children, for us, because we had a very loving grandmother, especially.
Mm-hmm.
And so we always knew, Grandma would feed us things like she let me eat all the bananas I wanted, and I got sick and for 20 years didn't like bananas. But, but it was not good for my mother because she wanted naturally her own home.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody had to go in through the grandparents' house to get up there, up the stairs. And so she never felt that was one of a thing. You ask a question in preparation, people we admire. And I think my mother would be at the top of the list because she had made wedding vows, even though she was 16 and ran away. They were real vows, and she kept them even though there were struggles. And after dinner, the family would just the kids would go down and be with Grandma and Grandpa, rather than really stay upstairs as a family. And you're kind of drawn to your grandparents, I guess. And besides, she was doing dishes, so we would go down. So that it was good in some ways, but not so much for my mother, So it was really good when they built a home, and the home wasn't just kind of down the street, so I could still see my grandparents. I grew up around them, and my boys grew up around my parents on the same street. Unfortunately, that did not carry through to our grandchildren because they are far away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your relationship like with your grandkids?
Very good. Because when they were young, we flew back there 3 times a year. I mean, it's a long,
Yeah, Alexandria,
Virginia.
it's a long way.
Exactly. And then they came here always for Christmas. And so we do have a very good relationship with them. Even though now they're teenagers, they are 15, almost 18, and almost 20. So we do talk with them and do FaceTime and, go visit. We're going back for Thanksgiving.
Have they read your book, Hell Frozen Over?
Yeah, the 2 of them have. The youngest one hasn't.
Mm-hmm.
I need to give it to him probably, and the others have. And then my granddaughter, Dee Dee, has helped me with this last book.
Mm-hmm.
She's read all of it, made suggestions, because she's old enough, it's very good at English and understands what might be confusing to kids or what they might not understand, which Nana wouldn't know that,
Sure.
Effigy, hanged in effigy.
Yeah.
What's that?
That had to be fun to have like this project that you could share with your granddaughter and have her contribute to.
Well, and there's another book that I didn't mention, not that I'm trying to mention books, but I wrote a fantasy book of time travel. It's called Journey to Elsewhere, and my 3 grandkids by different names are in there, and they travel back in time into 1854 to meet Harriet Tubman.
Okay.
Helping free the slaves. So they have a very adventuresome time. So Dee Dee especially helped with that.
Is that one published?
Yes.
What's the title of that one?
Journey to Elsewhere.
Journey to Elsewhere.
For kids and about the same 9 to 12.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fun things to write and hear about. The imagination. The last risk you talked about was leaving a church and a community that you've been in for 55 years. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there's all kinds of things that are connected in with that. Mm-hmm. What helped you get the grasp of like a new day, like that you could step into a new day in a new place?
Well, this is an amazing church to begin with. The preaching always is excellent. It's always biblical. It's always Christ-centered. And the music is what we love. We are in the 9 o'clock service. But I've been in also the 10:30 service. And to me, for people who enjoy the more modern, I think it's very good, well done. Um, so I think what really, one day, just to tell you, we were ready to take communion. And we were back and forth between the two churches. And we would go to service here and Sunday school there. Hard to give up
A community.
your friends, a community.
Yeah.
And I was starting to step out to go down and take community. And I had the clearest voice in my head that said, "This is where you belong." And I thought, really? It was so clear. So I went down, took communion, came back, went out, got in the car. I couldn't wait to tell Ed what had happened. So I opened the door, got in, started to tell him. He opened the door, got in, and he said, "I need to tell you something." And I said, "What?" He said, "I had the strongest impression in there that this is where we belong." I looked at him and said, "You must be kidding me." He said, "No." And then I told him what had happened to me. So for us, there was no doubt about it. I said to him later, "When did this happen to you?" And he said, "Right before communion."
Wow.
So it was a wow moment. When you hear something that clear, and I realize everybody does not, most people don't, and I don't know why we did, but we were so kind of torn back and forth. We just said, "No, this is it." And I will tell you, Jason, we love our friends at our former church.
Yeah.
But we have never been sorry. We thank God so often for bringing us to this church. And it turned out quite a few of our friends kind of came here too. And that happened because we came and then we began saying to people that maybe felt they didn't fit maybe as well in the other church, and they tried it. And so in general, that's what happened.
It's really, one of the challenges that I think a lot of people face is like finding their fit into a church.
Right.
And the beautiful thing is, I think it's beautiful anyways, when Paul talks about the varied gifts of the body, it's just like there are gifts that certain churches reflect. And there is a place for everyone.
Right.
God has made places for everyone to fit and belong. And it's just hard to find. Sometimes it's hard to find those places, but there is a place for everyone to belong.
And I personally don't think it's a bad thing when people realize I don't fit in this spot anymore. Right. I would fit better somewhere else. Yeah. That's not to say that the first place is bad, right, or the second place is just totally better for everybody.
Right.
It's just we need to find our fit.
Yeah.
And so I feel as though I have found it here. And it was very necessary, I realized, to get involved. And so we have done that.
You have, yeah. And we'll save that conversation for another day. But you've got a fun ministry that you're part of,
right?
And blessing young moms.
That's right, single mothers.
Yeah, and so we'll have to jump into that on another podcast. Okay. Marilyn, thanks so much for coming in and sharing your story. I do want to recommend and plug your book, Hell Frozen Over, because I got to read that.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. Have enjoyed that, have reflected on that. And one of the stories that you write about that's just almost incredible to think about in there is how when soldiers were taken as prisoners of war, how many of them ended up in rail cars.
Oh, absolutely.
And they would not know that their friends and fellow soldiers on their side would be bombing and strafing them from the air.
Christmas Eve, Frankfurt, Germany.
Yeah, just a frightening thought in terms of like everyone was against you, and thinking about how much they could have identified with David in the Psalms.
Oh, yes.
Where it's like, my friends and enemies have both abandoned me.
Absolutely.
And
You know, I was able to take all that I had learned in that book and insert it into my war at Windsor School. I set it in 1944, 45, and I gave my main character, an uncle who went to the Battle of the Bulge.
That's really creative writing when you use all of that
Yeah.
and use that history background.
True.
But Help Frozen Over is a great book.
Thank you.
And you can tell how much research and passion went into that. And so I'm sure
I abandoned everything I had taught about research and writing when I wrote that book. It didn't work. What I had taught my students to put it on note cards didn't work. I said, that's enough of that. And I just started doing it the way they did it. Just put Post-it notes in the book. It just took too much time to do it the other way. So,
well, there's nothing like having a professor then use their own medicine and then find out.
It didn't work. So after that, I changed the way I taught research.
Sure.
To a whole new computerized method that I had used.
Yeah.
At Evangel.
Fun times.
Okay.
Well, Marilyn, thank you so much. Generally, I like to close with asking folks if they've got a bit of wisdom that they'd love to pass along or share with listeners.
I guess I was trying to think of that. And as I looked at just a few notes that I had made here, I realized I think it is take some risks in life, because if it is prayerfully considered, and even if it's not prayerfully considered, but your attitude is, God, I want the best that you have for me, I think you can feel whether or not to take this risk. And people who never, if I had not taken those 5 risks that I listed here, my life would have been so impoverished. I wouldn't be married to my husband to start with. And then you just go down. I'd never written what I did. I wouldn't be at Schweitzer.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be here talking.
That's a great word. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. A big thank you to Marilyn for sharing her story. In listening to Marilyn, I hope that you were inspired, encouraged, and challenged, and that you begin to behold the really cool people that are around you. The Really Cool People podcast is produced by Schweitzer Church, Springfield, Missouri. Taylor Likes is our executive producer and editor, and I'm your host, Jason Leininger. You can help us out by liking, reviewing, and sharing this podcast. Until next time, stay cool.